These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at allbookoutloud.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
For our book today, we're reading from Ilan Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over it in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947, it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City, as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine, in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its two upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was in fact the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was taken, it took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all, its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation, regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere those who initiated and perpetrated ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948. But it's impossible to reconstruct their crimes. Anyhow, it continues the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy, what is it, Wednesday? Holy cow, I get all disoriented when we've got a holiday on a Monday. Welcome to the program. We've got a lot to talk about today. In our first hour, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us in just a moment. Our Middays with Mark, National Town Hall Meeting. Also in our second hour, we're going to start out with a quick interview with Professor Richard Wolff. How do housing bubbles form and how do they pop? And are we in one? And what does the future hold? Also, must America, I want to get into this, my op-ed this morning, that America really has to prepare for a decades-long war over gun control. And I'll dig into that in some depth at about quarter after the next hour. And also, we've found the Republican plans to challenge basically every single Democratic voter in every single Democratic precinct. And this is going to be a wild ride. I'll tell you about that in the second hour. And finally, in our third hour today, Dear Tucker, what has hurt more people, white guilt or white conservative racism? An interesting takeover on Fox so-called news. And why are Republicans so in love with hate speech? A decision from the Supreme Court today. Again, we'll get into that today. So a lot on our calendar, as it were, or on our schedule for the day. But let's start out with Congressman Mark Pocan, our Middays with Mark hour. He will be taking your calls at 202-808-9925 for the hour. Congressman Pocan is the former chair and current member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. Pocan.house.gov is his website, and Rep. Mark Pocan is his Twitter handle. And, give us a shout. Congressman Pocan, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you with us. I'm curious what's on your mind for the day.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this is the week the House and Senate are in district, with Memorial Day week. So people should be hopefully getting around their districts. There'd be an opportunity to actually have face-to-face time at events with your elected officials. But, one, we're preparing for next week in the House. We're going to have a number, either as a package or a number of gun bills before us, clearly trying to address what just happened in Texas. And I could probably name every single state in the union, unfortunately, where we've had some sort of shooting within, unfortunately, too short amount of a time. But also, still, this is kind of the point where I consider the start of the fall political season. When you get after Memorial Day, it seems like this is really the kickoff. Politicians are out in parades at community events. Everyone's campaigning towards November. But also, those issues, whether it be inflation, whether it can be gun violence, whether it be the overturning of Roe versus Wade, or other issues, certainly are starting to form for the November election. So it's a pretty crucial time in the majority in the House and trying to broaden the majority in the Senate, given headwinds that are out there. But I think we're all very aware of where we're at right now.
Yeah, I totally get that. And also, there's in Idaho right now, there is a group, and now Idaho is a state that Donald Trump won by 30 points. Right? I mean, Republicans outnumber Democrats by something like 4-1 in Idaho. I mean, actually, I'm not sure of that number, but it's just absolutely massive. And yet, Progress Idaho, a local progressive group, has gotten more than enough signatures to put a ballot measure on that will raise taxes on people earning over $250,000 a year, will raise the corporate income tax rate from 6 to 8.5%, and use all that money to pay for education. And the state law requiring, a certain number of signatures to get on the ballot requires that a certain number of those signatures be from rural areas. And Progress Idaho is saying, hey, we had no problem. We had no problem at all. People want to fund education, even if it means their own taxes go up. How is it that in arguably one of the most conservative, reddest states in the United States, this looks like it's going to be easy peasy. Obviously, who knows? But we've seen things like, like down in Florida, they passed an increase in the minimum wage. Same deal. Everybody's expecting that the Idaho legislature will probably reverse, the Citizens Initiative. But how is it that in one of these super red states, this kind of stuff can get done, and yet we can't get it done at the federal level?
This is the problem. The people are so far ahead of elected officials. I think so often Democrats and Republicans are actually afraid of their constituents too often, right? They take the safest route because they think that's the best way to get reelection, but then they're not really listening to the people they represent. I mean, clearly, Joe Biden, a big part of his Build Back Better agenda was raising taxes on corporations and the wealthiest, right, in order to pay for things that people actually want, that they support, things like in Idaho education. The problem is the special interests in Washington get into the ears of elected officials. People decide that getting reelected is the most important thing rather than doing something once they're elected. And you see a lot of, honestly, cowardice in too many elected officials. So, again, I used to have bumper stickers that said, if the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. Then I had my logo on it. I believe that so much. And this is one where if we actually looked at where people are at, we should be far more bold on raising taxes on the wealthiest, going after corporations that find ways to hide profits overseas. These are not left-right spectrum issues. These are pretty much mainstream issues, and we should be very proud to be campaigning on them.
Yeah, amen. Okay, let's pick up some phone calls here. Sure. Mike in Chicago. Mike, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yesterday, there was an interesting subject that was mentioned about the immunity laws or the immunity law that's been put in place for gun manufacturers and gun dealers. Is the process to reverse that just as intensive or complicated as to actually pass such a bill? I mean, meaning, I guess, is filibuster still in place and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, for any law, unless it's fiscal in nature, which is that reconciliation process we tried to use on Build Back Better and we did use on infrastructure and other bills, you have to go through the arcane rules that the Senate has. So to your simple question, yes. Interestingly, Mike, this is something I was just yesterday, I have it on my note list to spend talking to my staff when I get back next week, specifically on this issue, because, anything will take a lot of work to do, but why is it that, so many people who genuflect to the NRA, which is really gun manufacturers, we all know that that's who funds the NRA. It's about gun sales, not about anything else. But so many people, pay so much lip service to them, and yet, we allow this very unique carve out for a product, especially an AR-15. What is it really useful for in our day-to-day lives? I mean, you really aren't hunting with it. You certainly aren't going to probably use that as a real personal protection, because you're not going to be able to carry that on yourself like you might a handgun for personal protection. There's very little excuse to provide that kind of immunity for some of these weapons, and maybe that's another thing we should be looking at. So, Mike, I think you bring up an interesting point, something that I myself was just pondering over. But anything, to your very specific question, anything has to follow the arcane rules as long as the Senate decides to follow them, and that includes the 60 votes around the filibuster.
Yeah, and it's going to be a challenge on an ongoing basis. It's coming up on 15 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He is taking your calls at 202-808-9925. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. You can find his website at Pocan, Pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Middays with Mark, your chance to speak with one of the best members of the U.S. House of Representatives out there. And welcome back. Tim in Mattawan, Michigan. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Representative, I would like to know why the people in Congress didn't learn their lesson from the Korean War and Vietnam War and let people cross a border and then be safe. I think that we should send as many long-range weapons as we can to Ukraine and let them win by showing that they're better.
I hear you, Tim. I think that's what we're attempting to do, right? We keep doing as much as possible and giving weapons that they're asking for in Ukraine. What I think many of us are concerned about is we don't want to send U.S. troops there. We don't want this to be a world war. We don't want that kind of involvement because it would be very costly in terms of lives and other things. And so far, I've been happy the way the administration has handled this to make sure that we're not sending U.S. troops, but we are trying to provide help in every other possible way. I actually think this week, Tom, what the European Union is going to finally do on getting energy from Russia might be pivotal right now, and it's something very important. Unfortunately, it's between now and December. Right. But I think we needed that probably months ago, but it's helpful that they're doing it now. And if we can keep this squeeze on, the Ukrainian people have been amazing at defending their country. We're trying to provide all that we can, but we don't want a world war.
I think history is going to show Zelensky as the Churchill of this generation. I really do. I'm with you. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my call. Congressman, Mitch McConnell just said that one of his most consequential achievements was to stop Obama for appointing Merrick Garland. So I believe he believed that his whole opposition is that Supreme Court, that he'll be able to do whatever laws or restrictions that we come up with, the Supreme Court could just knock them down. Are we hesitating and accepting the fact that we're dealing with the opposition of the Supreme Court that is going to stop anything we try to achieve? They reversed the Clean Water Act. How can you do that and not recognize that you're jeopardizing all Americans when you do that? So that's my question. Do the Democrats understand what we're up against when we're dealing with the Republican Party? I don't think we have a full understanding.
Yeah, I hear you, Tyrone. First of all, I think people are very aware. A number of us talk about it. Mondaire Jones from New York has got a bill to expand the court for many of those reasons. It has been fluid through our history as a country. It's time, I think, to expand the size of the court and deal with it that way. But, it's not just Mitch McConnell, by the way. This has been decades-long planning by the conservative movement, by the special interest, by some of the wealthiest people in this country, to have a fallback, right? As long as they have the Supreme Court, while they're doing all the other election work they do, they always have another vehicle to get things done. The problem is, with Donald Trump, kind of the crazies got the steering wheel for a while, and they still are there. Even if maybe they're now in the passenger seat, they're still driving that car in many ways. The problem is what they've wanted to do was overturn Roe versus Wade, a half century of law. It's a lot of other things as well.
Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's Middays with Mark here on this beautiful Wednesday morning here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Have you noticed that people are basically imitating Donald Trump all over the country? We're seeing all this rude behavior, sexist, racist behavior. People getting arrested at airport gates, airplanes being turned around because people are fighting with flight attendants, disorderly, rude, unhinged conduct. I mean, it's just gone nuts. Car crashes are up, gun deaths are up, shootings are up. Healthcare workers are being literally physically assaulted in some hospitals. They're having to put together panic buttons. This kind of behavior in our schools is increasing. It looks like, according to some sociologists, psychologists, and even business consultants, it looks like a lot of this ties back not just to the Trump presidency, with Donald Trump providing us with an example of how to be, an obnoxious person, but also the crisis of the pandemic. We've got a deeper dive into this topic over at ThomHartmann.com. There's a great video about it. You can check it out there. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Paul in Amber, Pennsylvania. Paul, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Representative Pocan, when can we expect to hear the congressional hearings into the rise of gasoline prices due to the organized monopoly of OPEC? When I watch evening news or even some cable news, which I occasionally look at, I don't hear one word about OPEC, the oil producing and export countries that have a formal cartel that controls all production, distribution, and refining of gasoline. I mean, when are we going to stop hearing about it's President Biden or the Democrats' fault that the price at the pump is too high? When are we going to have congressional hearings about this?
And Congressman, if I can toss something on top of that.
Yeah, please.
The last year of the Obama administration, Congress and the Obama administration overturned a law that forbade the United States or companies in the United States from exporting oil. Mm-hmm. And the rationale was that we're producing more oil than we can use, so that we've got to export some of it. If we are truly oil independent, and everything I've read suggests we are, then if Congress were to go back to that law, which Richard Nixon got put into place in 1973 in response to the first oil crisis, if we went back to that law, wouldn't that allow the United States to decouple from international prices on oil and lower the price of oil here in the United States? Because we would become a single market essentially for those kind of products.
Yeah, so let me try to address both together. First of all, Tom, I think you may be onto something that we need to do. We need to do something different than we're doing right now. There have been hearings, Paul, that the Energy and Commerce Committee has had, but I'll be honest, paint drying may have been more stimulating than the hearing they had with oil company executives on gas prices, and I don't think we did a very good job. I don't think Democrats are messaging this well at all. We have recordings from oil company executives who have said they've limited production because they were trying to have higher returns for their shareholders. And now we're all paying that price. Remember last March, Tom, when there was the cold spell went through Texas and they don't have enough to protect their energy grid because they don't invest in their government, and oil prices went up, gas prices went up because some refineries were shut down. They never went back down. And we've been paying high prices since last March. And then we had another now, of course, because of Ukraine, a further increase. But this is oil executives not taking their responsibility well. First of all, it's a monopolized industry with very few players. Second of all, we still subsidize them with record profits, which makes no sense. Third, we give them all kinds of extra leasings on energy that they're not even using, and yet they treat us like we're human trash. I think the president needs to bring an oil executive company, one of these companies that's really, I think, abusing the process, and take them to task publicly. Bring them in front of the public and show what they're doing and shame them greatly. And one of the ways, Tom, is things like you're talking about. They don't have to have every rule working to their advantage when they're not even supporting the American people. We need to be far more aggressive than we've been. And today might have been on the phone with the White House with this as one of my messages, because I'm very concerned we're not handling this well. And I think, I look at what the president tried yesterday on inflation. I think it was a swing and a miss. I think we need to be far more aggressive in going after some of these folks that are abusing the process, because that is a significant part of what we're doing on gas prices in particular. And I think other than the fact that they're very powerful, and in some states like Texas, they have Democrats and Republicans who seem to sometimes defend them more aggressively than they should. I just think we're not handling this in the way we need to, Tom, at all.
Yeah, amen. I think it was the UK just imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil industry.
That's one thing you could do. I just think, we're still subsidizing them.
Right.
We subsidize them with record profits. This is all an example of what's wrong with the power of special interest in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, amen. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. We have about a minute and a half here to the break. You got a quick question?
Yeah, well, I just want to mention something about the oil problem. Did you ever notice that the price at the pump goes up immediately, even though it could take up to a month to refine the oil that comes out of the ground?
Yeah.
The oil,
and then it doesn't go back down.
Last month.
Yeah. So is it your question for Congressman Pocan?
Yeah, hi. I don't understand why it is we don't have an international fund for refugees, part of the UN that we pay into, that deals with these people, because the UN can't usually do it so well. And why shouldn't we have like a trade for taking in refugees for paying into it, something like that?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. I don't serve on the committee that deals directly with foreign relations, so I'm not going to say that this is the absolute answer. But one of the problems we saw under Donald Trump is we quit taking refugees in. I think we're back to doing a better job of that in the United States. Other countries, Poland deserves a lot of credit for what they've done with Ukraine right now. But that's part of our DNA, really, as a country, is accepting refugees. We are a nation in many ways of people from many different countries, and we've always accepted refugees. I hope that we'll always live up to that and not go back to where we were with Donald Trump. I hear the music, Tom. I'll let it go.
Amen. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, former co-chair of the Congressional Caucus, Progressive Caucus, representing Wisconsin, the 2nd District in the U.S. House. We'll be back with your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Pocan.house.gov on the internet. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016, one of my favorites. In her writings, this is from page 62, by the way, a middle-class primer is the chapter title. In her writings, which have become foundational for libertarian theology, author Ayn Rand suggested that the only purpose of government should be to prevent oppression by force. What she neglected to consider was all the force inherent in nature. If you're hungry, there is the force of biology. If you're homeless, you confront the force of wind, storms, ice, and rain. If you're sick, you confront the ravages and force of disease. These were the forces that provoked the first governments. the first communities, the first clans and tribes, the first nation states. It's easy for libertarian elitists, such as multimillionaire TV talking heads or college kids reading Atlas Shrugged, to talk about how there should be no government beyond police, the army, and the courts. They all have enough resources that they don't need to deal with the forces of raw nature. And that explains why billionaires would bankroll libertarian-leaning think tanks that will, when the crash comes with its full force, tell us it was caused by big government. However, in the real world, humans must confront both nature and other humans, which is why we create governments and why we create economies. But it wasn't until 1776 when Thomas Jefferson placed John Locke's right to life, liberty, and property, or replaced it, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the idea of a large class of working people had the ability to pursue happiness, the middle class. It wasn't until 1776 that that was even seriously considered as a cornerstone obligation to government. This is also the first time in history that the word happiness had ever appeared in any nation's formative documents, as Jefferson wrote in 1817 to Dr. John Manners, quote, "The evidence of this natural right, like that to our right of life, liberty, the use of our faculties, the pursuit of happiness is not left to the feeble and sophisticated investigations of reason, but is impressed on the sense of every man." As Jefferson realized, with no government interference by setting the rules of the game of business and fair taxation, there could be no broad middle class, maybe a sliver of small business and artisans, but the vast majority of us would be the working poor under the yoke of elites. The economic royalists know this, which gets to the root of why they set out to destroy government's involvement in the economy. After all, in a middle-class economy, they may have to give up some of their power, and some of the higher end of their wealth may even be redistributed, horrors of horrors, for schools, parks, libraries, and other things that support a healthy middle-class society but are not needed by the rich, who live in a parallel but separate world from the rest of us. As Jefferson laid out in his 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval, a totally free market where corporations reign supreme, just like the oppressive governments of old, could transform America, quote, until the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bella omnium in omnia, which some philosophers observing to be so general in this world have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man. Although this may come as a sudden realization to many, we've really known it all our lives. In fact, in the 6,000-year history of the civilized world, a middle class emerging in any nation has been such a rarity as to be largely historically invisible. The United States has had two great periods of what we today call a middle class. The first was from the 1700s to the mid-1800s and was fueled by virtually free land for settlers, stolen from the Indians, and free labor, slavery in the South and indentured immigrants in the North. The result was, as de Tocqueville pointed out, the most well-educated, politically active, middle-class non-aristocrats in the world. The second period didn't take hold until after World War II, during my dad's lifetime. Unlike the first, which was fueled by free land and slaves, the second had to be carefully constructed with specific and what some might define as socialist policies put in place during the New Deal, which asserted more democratic control over the economy and workplace in order to keep the economic royalists in check. To both stimulate and balance the domestic economy, FDR reinstituted progressive taxation, which gave workers more to spend and gave the rich an incentive to pay their workers better to maintain a stable workplace, since if they took the money themselves, it would just mostly go to taxes, thus stimulating demand for more goods and services. Progressive taxation has a long history. As Jefferson said in a 1785 letter to James Madison, quote, "Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from taxation all below a certain point and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise." FDR eventually hiked the top income tax rate paid by the super rich in America to 90%. This had a twofold effect. First, it held income inequality in check and ushered in an era of equal income and a growth among all classes. Unlike the Gilded Age, when the economy grew at a blistering pace but the gains were afforded only to the robber barons, the period between 1947 and 1980 saw unparalleled equitable growth. During these 30-plus years, the poorest fifth in America saw a 116% increase in their incomes. The middle fifth, 111% increase. Top 5% only saw an 85% increase. All income classes shared in the prosperity of the times when the top marginal income tax rate was above 70%. The second effect of a high income tax rate was to bring stability to the economy. And then it goes through the whole explanation of how that worked. The book is The Crash of 2016.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Nick in Santa Barbara, California, listening on KPFK. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thank you so much. So I have a proposal. For example, if I want to get a gun, it does make sense to get two co-signers who knew me last 2 years. They like a teacher or a neighbor or somebody from the community, which will be okay with me walking around with a gun. So what is your take on this?
Yeah, Nick, I think that would play to pretty much every fear that Republicans put out there, that you're going to somehow stop people from getting guns, that it's not your own personal freedom to have a gun. Look, I don't know of many elected officials who are after someone's hunting rifle or even their personal protection of a handgun. The real issue, I think, is how easy you can access it, how you can go around the rules to access guns. And I would argue, do you really need an AR-15 for any practical personal purpose? Those, I think, would be some of the better ways to address it, rather than making it more cumbersome to actually get a hunting rifle or a handgun for personal protection. I just think some of those might play into some of the arguments that the Republicans use to say it's a slippery slope and we're after everything.
Michael in Anchorage, Alaska. Michael, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello. Hey, thank you for taking my call. Mark and Tom, I have been listening to your show for 10 plus years. My question is this: why are our representatives not really representing the public speak? Anchorage, Alaska, I don't believe has had gun violence. Yeah, there's probably 2 or 3 murders every day, but they're never reported. My question for you is, what can we do as a country, as the whole country, all 50 states? Why are we so, what? We're dead in our eyes. I look in a congressman's eyes. I look.
Michael, what's the topic you're arguing is not being addressed?
Why are we waging war in every country that we can?
Okay, Congressman.
I have to admit, there's a lot there, Tom.
I'm not sure I understood the question, so we'll just move on. Ed in Los Angeles. Ed, you're on the air.
First of all, I want to say thank you for your service for both of you. It helps me keep sane. Anyway, my last Sunday I watched 60 Minutes, and they showed the high-powered AR-15s versus a regular handgun. And my thought was that if the pictures of the children that were slaughtered were shown to the congressmen and the senators, maybe they could change the hearts.
Yeah, Ed, if you're right, if I could say members of Congress and other elected officials and legislatures were normal, the problem is this is a special interest of gun manufacturers. That's what the NRA is. It's not about gun owners, because no one's going after the average person's gun. This is gun manufacturers who want to have unlimited sales of guns with no restrictions. Doesn't matter what the cost is in human terms or any other term. And you have to have elected officials that don't genuflect and do anything that they want. The problem is, you saw the NRA convention, who all goes to it. This is an issue that has a true special interest problem that makes it very difficult to look at that. So absolutely, those pictures should be horrifying to anyone, but they're going to choose not to consider that aspect of it. They're going to consider just what's in their best interest politically, and that's to continue to appease gun manufacturers. Tom, in Vegas, I used an AR-15. I went to one of those things. I wanted to see what it was actually like. And I went and shot with one because I wanted to actually have the experience so I could talk about it, I think, better. There's no way you would use that either for personal protection or really for hunting. This is used for really warfare. I mean, it's used to take out lots of human lives in that sort of situation. Why we would make that something that has to be readily available for everyone for freedoms? No, because it takes away the freedoms of 19 kids and 2 adults in Texas. And think of all the other shootings we've had every single weekend. We have to be more aggressive. And I'll be honest, I'm not happy, Democrats, that's not on our agenda next week. Banning assault weapons is not. Even though there's 205, I believe, sponsors to the bill, it will not be on the floor. Other measures that'll be helpful are, but we're still not addressing, I think, some of the most important.
Yeah, the assault weapons ban was very, very effective. Tim in Chatsworth, California, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Gentlemen, thanks for taking my call, Tom. Longtime listener. I am a progressive Democrat. I'd like to give you a different perspective, but my question is, are you familiar with Prop 47 in California?
Absolutely not.
Me neither.
Prop 47 was a law that was passed, and this is quote-unquote progressive legislation to help with the bail system and keeping, kids that are 17 and 18 years old from having felonies on their records and ended up just in the system. The problem with Prop 47, and this is going to be anecdotal, but this is my experience, and this is why people need AR-15s in certain situations, because I know that there's people that are on the left that don't understand it. I live in a very nice area that used to be gorgeous, which has been destroyed by Reaganomics. I understand that it's a systemic problem, and I agree with most of the gun laws as far as background checks and keeping people from
Can you cut to the
red
chase,
flag
Tim?
laws. Yes, sir. The problem is Prop 47 has reduced major felonies to a $50 slap on the wrist. And I'll tell you what, the gangbangers, when they come up here at night and steal our catalytic converters and break into our garages and cause us to lose our insurance, there are 3, 4, 5, 6 of them at a time. And I'm telling you right now, I've got a task force that we have to have with volunteers. And I'm telling you right now, one single Glock isn't going to do it.
Okay. Congressman?
Yes. Tim, I just respectfully disagree with you. I can't speak to what California's Proposition 47 did, but I can tell you, you can have a personal handgun for protection. You can have a hunting rifle if that's part of what you enjoy doing in your family traditions. But an AR-15 is not really useful for either. It is useful for one thing only, killing many people in a very quick amount of time. And I just disagree fundamentally that having those guns out there is in any way, any shape or form useful in the long term for the country. So especially when there's still this giant loophole around the background checks and it's so easy to get these guns in other ways, we have to have better rules in place, and we can't be so afraid of the gun manufacturers that want to make money off of selling them. And I just respectfully disagree.
Right. Or there's shills who call into radio programs. I can guarantee you, Tim says this is anecdotal, I guarantee you he has never engaged gangbangers with an AR-15, and nobody in his neighborhood has. It would make national news. This is just another one of these BS arguments. Pete in Newport, Oregon. Pete, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. So all of the big game that I've killed, I've shot with a semi-automatic rifle, a 30-06. I can use a five-round clip for hunting. The largest that it comes is a 10-round. What is the difference to you between an AR-15 and any other semi-automatic, other than the size of the magazine that comes with it or that you can get for it?
Yeah, so in Wisconsin, we have a lot of deer hunting. So I'm not sure by big game if you're talking. What kind of animal are you talking?
He's not on the line anymore.
Okay, I mean, if you're talking, going to Africa and killing elephants, well, that's a whole other conversation, maybe perhaps. But you still don't need to have that weapon in order to do it. In fact, it would probably be more of a sport if you didn't have a semi-automatic weapon in order to go hunting, right? But if the bad side of having those weapons out there is 19 kids and 2 adults get killed on any given day in Texas, then that is far more significant than your ability to use a semi-automatic weapon hunting big game.
Well, also in Canada, you can't have a clip that contains more than 5 shots. And
magazine clips have been part of what we've talked about as well. I'm not sure if it's part of the bills that Judiciary is looking at, I just know they're not taking up the semi-automatic weapon.
And in most states, you can't. You've got to, if you're hunting duck, for example, you can't have more than 3 shots. It's called a duck load. Brent in Tucson, Arizona, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Oh, hi, Mark. It's good talking with you. Mark, I'd like to bring up an idea, see what you think about it. I talked with this a little bit with Tom last week. I'd like to promote, like when we vote on getting big money out of politics or voting rights legislation, I would like to have it go through what you would call maybe a national referendum freedom ballot, where everybody in the nation gets together and we vote on it. You said earlier that eventually the leaders will follow. I think that we could cut a lot of time and get our issues, the democratic issues, put across much quicker if we voted on it to begin with. This would just be on legislation, major legislation, ideas that are very pressing
referendum
to the public.
Got it.
Yeah, I'll tell you a couple concerns, Brent, just thinking it out loud. One, I don't quite know how you would do that. I think that would be perhaps very difficult to actually have it be accountable and do. Second, one of my problems with binding referendums in some states that have it, we don't have it in Wisconsin, I know California does, is, think about issues like marriage equality. Before marriage equality, which now is widely popular, wasn't, you can still have a majority of people in some cases take away the rights or the privileges of others. And I am concerned a little bit about the binding referendum process if you did something like that at a national level, because at times it could just be actually taking away some of the rights and freedoms that you should have as an American.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can find his website at Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark, M-A-R-K, Pocan, Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Back with your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. And welcome back. Mike in Reno, Nevada, listening on the Thom Hartmann app. Hey, Mike, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning. Congressman, very quickly, I just wondered, are there any Republicans that you can actually work with? You go to work with them every day? Do you have lunch with them? That's my basic question. Are there any good ones you can work with? And I'll take the answer off the air.
Yeah, Mike, it's an interesting question. So, yes, there are Republicans you can work with. You may not agree with everything on, but you can do it without being disagreeable, especially on appropriations. Quite honestly, I'm a little spoiled. It's one of the more normal committees where you don't have people who are just trying to raise money off of outrageous actions like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and the like. The problem is, leadership plays to those folks that get all the media, and therefore someone like Kevin McCarthy that already has, is challenged in standing up for the right things, winds up letting that group run their party, and then ultimately that's how the decisions are made. So yes, there are Republicans. I think the other fantasy is I wish we had time to have lunch with others. Usually mine involves eating at my desk during a committee or trying to eat at 2 in the afternoon or 3 in the afternoon my lunch because I have to have a 10-minute break in between things. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time with our current schedules to actually get to know members. And that's one thing I would love to see a schedule change. Right now we meet either Monday to Thursday or Tuesday to Friday with a fly-in day on each end. That means you have 2 full days you're in Washington to do everything. And a couple weeks ago, I had 6 committees in a 2.5-day period, which meant several of them were going at the same time. You can't do your work in the way you need to. I would rather see us go for several weeks in a row, 5-day weeks, full 5-day weeks. You can go home on the weekend as long as you're back on Sunday night to start Monday morning. it would give us more floor time, but it also would have you one more week a month in your district listening to your constituents. There's a way to make it better, and that would perhaps allow you to get together with people and have a meal and maybe get to know each other, which I do think is crucial to this process.
Ray in East Haven, Connecticut, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, this is my first-time caller, Tom. I just love your show.
Thank you, Ray.
And I'm amazed. Well, I'm amazed at how fantastic your audience is, and you have great guests like Representative Pocan. And my question is, especially for Representative Pocan, is that when I communicate with intelligent and sensitive liberal Democrats like myself, or listen to them like on your show, I almost always hear that the problem of the Democratic Party is that it doesn't have a coherent, persuasive message. And that's my question for Representative Pocan, is that why can't the party develop and use such a message?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Ray, I think, what we often say is Republicans talk in headlines, Democrats talk in paragraphs. And that's part of the problem, right? Because the attention span, look at Twitter, is only so many characters. People are used to getting a short message. And Republicans message better. Now, they don't believe in a lot. And often what they believe in isn't what they actually are doing. And that's the difference. But I do think there's some lessons we could learn from what you said.
Great. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for the Representative Pocan in just a moment. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Pocan.house.gov is website, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. I don't know if you caught this, but there was a piece of legislation before the House of Representatives that explicitly required the U.S. State Department to preserve any evidence of war crimes committed by the Russian forces in Ukraine. To gather reports of it, to preserve it, presumably in anticipation of some sort of a war crimes prosecution. And for reasons I can't quite figure out, maybe you have an idea, 6 Republicans voted against this. No, we don't want the war crimes of the Putin administration to be. Thomas Massey from Kentucky, Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, Warren Davidson from Ohio, Andy Biggs from Arizona, and Paul Gosar from Arizona. I'm scratching my head here. Why would these 6 Republican politicians not want us to preserve the war crimes evidence? There's a video about this that you can see over at thomhartmann.com. And taking your calls for the hour, Bob in Chicago, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good afternoon. Good morning. From Pocan. I'm calling about judicial review. My question to you is, and I've looked this up a little bit, we all know, if you've attended Thom Hartmann University, that is a power that the SCOTUS has taken on themselves and not something that's been delineated in the Constitution. Has Congress ever sued them to take that power away? I can see where it would probably come back with a, no, we're going to keep the power. But would you please take all of your fellow congressmen and pass a bill or start an action to sue the Supreme Court for them to lose the power of judicial review?
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't think there ever has been a suit. I think that's your point. So I'll let me think about it. Let me mull it around. But I do think that we are in a period where we do need to look at changing the size of the Supreme Court. And again, there is legislation to do that. I don't think it's going to be an easy, quick thing. But I do think Mondaire Jones, and I forget who in the Senate has the bill offhand, but I do think it's something that we should be considering as important. Also, if I could, Tom, the judiciary bill on guns does include a new ban on the import, sale, and manufacturing and transfer of high-capacity magazines, but it does grandfather in any existing ones. I just wanted to mention that because I wasn't sure.
Interesting.
It is in what they're looking at.
Cool. Thank you. Michael in Bangor, Maine. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, yes, Congressman. Tom knows I'm a conservative attorney, and I'm just going to ask this question. It seems to me that everybody's overlooking the major problem here, that the Constitution does not really give the federal government, in its enumerated powers, the ability to tell states what to do with this type of stuff. And so my question
this type of
to
stuff
you
being
is,
guns, Michael?
Pardon me?
This type of stuff being guns?
Yes.
Okay. What about the Commerce Clause? Well, anyhow, ask your question for Congressman Pocan. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be inserting myself here.
No, we can have that conversation sometime, Tom. I'm just asking the congressperson to explain to people why the states shouldn't be regulating this as opposed to Congress.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, well, first of all, I think they can do it. They mostly don't. But I think something at this level, if you had some uniformity across state lines, makes sense, which is why we need some national legislation on this. And, you know, I'll tell you, I can't go to another floor day in Congress where we have a moment of silence and then do absolutely nothing to stop these massacres. It's a uniquely, unfortunately, a U.S. problem that doesn't exist in other countries. So that is the definition of a problem. It's something we can fix, but we choose not to because of the special interests of the gun manufacturers. So, Michael, we could have debates about the Constitution and the powers there. I do think we have the powers to do it at the federal level. More importantly, I think we should use those powers to get it done.
Rodney in, there we go. Rodney in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, Tom and Mr. Robinson, why is Clarence Thomas not being investigated, him and his wife? Because I believe she's the one leaked it, because she's too tied into the situation.
Why is Congressman not investigating Ginny and Clarence Thomas?
I couldn't tell you that it's not happening, to be perfectly honest. I serve on the Appropriations Committee in Education and Labor. We don't do that, but perhaps Oversight and Government Reform or maybe Judiciary, there could be a committee doing that. I don't know that definitively, so I can't really answer that for Rodney. My committees don't have oversight like that.
Congressman, we just have 45 seconds. It's really not enough to toss another caller on. Your thoughts on where we should be focusing our activism in the coming weeks and what you're expecting to be happening?
Yeah, so I mean, next week we'll take up a lot of the gun legislation in the House. My busy period starts, or it's been already going for about the last 6 weeks on appropriations. We'll be trying to get budget bills with our fiscal year ending September 30th. This is the start of the political season. This is the time to get active politically. And I think that's my real message. If you care about whatever issue it is, you better get involved in campaigns now and not wait till October or November, because it could be a tough fall. And think how tough it'll be if you have Speaker Jim Jordan and Senator Mitch McConnell as the two leaders in the House and Senate. We have to be active now if you care about your personal freedoms.
Amen. Representative Mark Pocan. Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Thank you as always.
Always great talking with you. We will be back. Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. We're going to talk about housing bubbles, and then we'll get back to gun control and the army that the Republican Party is trying to organize to basically challenge every single Democratic voter who shows up this fall and in 2024. Tell you all about it in a minute.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Brian J. Karam. It's titled Free the Press, The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. This is from the very last chapter, page 265. My father once told me that if you have a complaint, then you'd better have a solution. People bitch about everything, he routinely told me. They seem to like it more than solving problems. I've often thought about that as I spent a career covering the news. It is increasingly popular to merely ignore those things with which we don't agree and treat people the same way. That's hardly a solution. It only creates more problems. My pop also preached to me about adaptability, as did Alan, and that is a lesson I've tried to apply to every part of my life, to adapt. By the time Alan was preaching the same thing, it was a lesson I'd already learned, though it's still much appreciated. Today, the changing media landscape calls for adherence to some of our strictest tenets, while at the same time adapting to how we deliver the news to the public. Our democracy demands it. The local paper is perilously close to completely disappearing. Large swaths of this country live in news deserts. According to a study published by Axios in June 2021, the United States has lost some 37,000 newsroom jobs since 2016. And according to a study released on May 1st, 2021, by the University of North Carolina's School of Media and Journalism, more than 1,300 communities across the United States have lost all news coverage. Among the findings in the study, about 20% of all metro and community newspapers in the United States, about 1,800, have gone out of business or merged since 2004, when about 9,000 were being published. Hundreds of more have scaled back coverage so much that they're becoming what researchers call ghost newspapers. Almost all of the newspapers still publishing have also scaled back, just less drastically. Online news sites, as well as some TV newsrooms and cable access channels, are working hard to keep local reporting alive, but these are not taking root. These are taking root more slowly than newspapers are dying. Hence the 1,300 communities that have lost all local coverage. To adapt to this undeniable fact, we have to make newspapers more viable and easier to sustain. We cannot afford to let newsrooms disappear because they play a vital role in delivering information that the internet cannot reproduce. When you go to the internet, you're usually on a hard target searching for information. When you pick up a newspaper, you're scanning for information and are open to read anything presented to you. You may not know what to search for, but you know what you want to read when you find it. Newspapers are smorgasbords of information. The internet isn't and cannot be set up that way. So how do we save newspapers? There are a variety of business models currently under consideration. Nonprofits hold promise, but as of yet, we haven't gotten the needed solution or the needed traction. A big push was made to save the Baltimore Sun through a nonprofit, and this may indeed be the best way to save newspapers, since the job they do for society is completely incompatible with capitalism. Quote, "There's no question about it. I don't think any problem facing the country is more severe than what is facing our news information infrastructure," end quote. Michael Copps, formerly of the Federal Communications Commission, told me. Quote, "I saw it. First call I got was from the chairman when I joined the FCC was about the merger of Fox and Chris Kraft. That set the tone. I was going to the FCC. I thought going to the FCC was the coolest job on earth. We'd be serving the public. And then I realized I spent a lot of time meeting with CEOs who wanted to seek approval of their mergers. The FCC more often than not approved the mergers. Then a rival would come in and gripe and say in order to compete, they had to have a merger too," end quote. The free market obviously isn't the answer. It only allows politics and information today to be played and reported on as sport. Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, and others saw it coming. This is a very steep mountain to climb, and there is no commercial solution to the problem. The corporate consolidation, as cops told me, is too embedded in the system. How do you get beyond that? The government has to exercise its antitrust laws, and we need to think about public media. Put the brakes on corporate mergers. Subsidies are the key, Victor Picard, the University of Pennsylvania communications professor, explained to me. He works at the intersections of U.S. and global media activities and politics, the history and political economy of media institutions, and the normative foundations of media policy. Quote, it's the commercialization, the dedication to clickbait, and profits above all else. That's what's driving this. There's no commercial incentive to do it right. Journalism often isn't sexy, end quote, he said. While there isn't one perfect model, Picard said he could see subsidized subscribers or a voucher plan. Everybody gets a $100 voucher and they can buy media of their choice. It guarantees a certain method of support. Subsidize the news outlets themselves. My preference is to radically expand and reform our public broadcast system so that they can actually be politically independent, end quote. Pickard also supports public media centers in every city across the country, public libraries, schools, and journalism schools. That's my radical plan. It's healthy to have a mixed system, independents, nonprofits, public benefit corporations, and standards for for-profit companies. The driving force today in journalism is capitalism, and it's driving our journalism into the ground. The book is Free the Press, The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. From pandemics or itself. Democracywork.info, RD Wolff with 2Fs.com, Democracy at Work, and Prof Wolff on Twitter. Professor, welcome back to the program. We're seeing a lot of stories about housing bubbles and concern that a recession is coming and that it might burst a housing bubble. I remember back in the day, Will Rogers famously said, my daddy told me, buy land, they ain't making it no more. And, land has and housing has been a fairly reliable investment, a major vehicle for the wealth of the middle class, certainly throughout my lifetime. I'm wondering what causes housing bubbles? Are we in a housing bubble? What happens when they burst? Where are we at with regard to all that? I mean, obviously we saw this disaster in 2008 around housing. Where do you think we're at now?
Well, I'm afraid it looks rather similar. As many people have noted, that's not unique to me, not by a long shot. Bubble is usually something one is very clearly seeing after it's over. In other words, it is a 20/20 hindsight kind of thing. You notice that prices went up a long time, very far in a short period of time, and then they collapse. And you look back on it and you say, oh, there was a bubble, and oh, it burst. This has happened repeatedly, both on a national level and in regions. The most famous part of the United States for having housing bubbles has been Florida, at least for the last century, for all kinds of special reasons. The prices have gone crazy over the last 2 or 3 months. That's very clear. The major reason for that is not the pandemic, and it's not the Ukraine war. It's the fact that for 20 years now, 20 years, the threat of a collapse of our economy, of a real depression, has been so severe that the Federal Reserve, governed whether by a Democrat or a Republican, didn't really matter, was terrified to do anything other than bring interest rates down 2 or even below 0, and that made money cheap, and that let the borrowers get going to buy the house and the borrowers to get going to make the house if you're a builder. The end result was a boom. And now the question is, with the inflation everywhere, in the housing industry even more, are we going to rein that back in? The Federal Reserve says yes. And then the question immediately comes, oh my goodness, will all the people who have borrowed money to buy a home be unable to make the payments? And then we're exactly where we were in 2007 and 8 all over again.
Yeah, now in 2007, 2008, there were liar loans that were legal, and and you had this whole slicing and dicing into collateralized debt obligations and everything else. I thought a lot of that had been taken care of. Are you concerned about those things, or is this more just that if there's a general downturn, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, and when they lose their jobs, they won't be able to make their mortgage payments?
Yeah, because, on the one hand, there are some restrictions that people point to who want to comfort themselves, but offsetting that are a whole set of new developments that have to be taken into account. During the pandemic, people, because they had to adjust their lives, borrowed, using the equity in their homes to borrow and jack up their indebtedness in order to improve their home, add a room, make accommodations for working at home, and all of that. Those people have raised their level of debt and didn't have to be governed by some of those adjustments that were made after 2007 and 8. And number two, perhaps more important, is that we have eroded the mass purchasing power and incomes of our people. Let's remember, the mass of Americans just went through the pandemic, which cost them all kinds of expenses, then an economic crash about the same time, now a devastating inflation that is literally making it impossible for them to continue the scale of level of standard of living they had. When you put all that together, you are suggesting the possibility of one of those so-called perfect storms where too many variables come together and make it impossible for the high level of prices. And remember, we have one more thing to keep in mind. The failure of many people along the way to maintain their homes over the last 4 years has meant that we've had a very significant shift in the way we own houses in the United States. Many fewer homes are owned by the people who live in them. Many, many more, we're talking millions now, of homes are owned by investment companies. They look at this the way they look at any other investment. If things go south, if the number of people who can buy in by renting, they're going to dump those houses. And when they do, you're going to see a new kind of depression of the housing bubble that we didn't even see before, because we hadn't gotten to the point where houses become an investment game for the super rich, rather than, as you put it, a way for the middle class to accumulate at least a little wealth.
Yeah, I wrote an op-ed about this about a year ago, and I was shocked doing the research into it, how extraordinary. I mean, in some communities you find, as many as half of all the homes that were available were being bought by, these giant hedge funds and, organizations like BlackRock and whatnot, as I recall. And it's, and then they're jacking up rents on top of that and making housing even more unaffordable. How much of a factor in the current price of housing do you think is this, I don't know if you'd call it market manipulation or just the predictable outcome of, big investors getting into housing for the first time, I think, in American history, at least the way they're doing it now. In Chattanooga, for example, they were talking about some mind-boggling percentage of houses owned by a big, hedge fund. How is that affecting things?
I think it's affecting it very significantly. Even if the number was still small, let's say 10%, 8%, 12%, something around there, you might think of that as small. But remember, a crash has to only start with a few people bailing. Once you start doing that and the prices start going down, it builds on itself. It means everybody else who was on the edge about selling their home is now prompted to sell it quickly because the prices are coming down. You want to sell before the price of what you're selling. And that becomes the very cataclysm that we then look back on and say that the bubble burst. I would like to underscore that the same BlackRock and other investment operations buying up housing in the United States are also doing it elsewhere. I did research recently to discover that one of the major owners of homes in Berlin, Germany, is the same company that owns homes in Chattanooga, New York, California, and all the rest, which means these companies are not just comparing housing in the United States with other housing in the United States. They're global. This is a globalization. If they can't make the kind of money they want in this country, they can do it somewhere else. And they will. They're not going to be bound by some rules of commitment to one society or another. Their business is growing globally, and we're now becoming just another place, and we better show up with the right money, the right profit, or else they're going to leave. And the cataclysm that may come from that, of the declining prices leading your regular homeowner to get out of it quickly too, that they're not responsible for that. They don't have to pay for that. They don't calculate that. They will make their decisions, and we all in this country will be left to live with the consequences.
I know in the developed world, at least the part of the developed world that vigorously embraced neoliberalism back in the 1980s, most of these laws have been done away with. But they're so common around the world where countries say, housing is something that we, it's so essential to the general welfare of our people that we're going to heavily regulate it. And foreign investors may not own housing unless they actually live in it and they have the equivalent of a green card, whatever that may be in that country. And corporations may not own housing except within very, very limited constraints, apartment buildings and things like that. As an economist, is that the sort of thing that you think that would be a good idea here in the United States, to limit, housing to families? Or is that the sort of thing that, I can just hear Stephen Moore's voice in my head going, that's government interference in the free market, oh my God.
Yes, let me make it real clear. I believe in government interference in the free market whenever a rational assessment of the situation indicates that the society as a whole benefits more, and that those are the issues for me. I compare the private profitability of the individual corporation with the social conditions. The craziness of the economics profession, of which I'm a part, to have taught all these years that what is privately profitable by some magic is supposed to automatically be what's best for society. I mean, I understand why they want to sell us that craziness, but we don't have to believe it. No, I agree that things like housing, food, and medical care are things that are fundamental to a decent life and should not be held hostage by people who tell us themselves that profit is their bottom line, that profit is why they're in business, that profit is what they achieve or go for. Okay, you go for profit, but not if it involves my diet, my home, and those other things. That's why, for example, in Europe right now, there are movements for cooperative housing precisely to avoid everything you just.
Great. Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Why must America prepare for a decades-long war over guns? I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, I was thinking back to about 1968 when I was visiting in a different city with a gentleman who was in a business. And he said at that time, no foreign entities could own property or businesses in this country. It was not something that was allowed. Can you verify when that was, or if it was?
I can't.
And when did that change?
I just don't know. I would like to know, Joan.
Well, I know in 1968 when we moved to this one city and this gentleman worked for a company, said that was not allowed. They weren't allowed.
That was an American city?
They were not sold to, the foreign countries were not allowed to own properties and businesses in this country. And that should have never changed, because that's where everything's kind of gone down the hill.
I agree.
We have more properties owned by foreign entities than the people of this country. There's so much foreign investment money in this country instead of letting the people in this country have charge of themselves. And I would like to know, if you don't know now, if you would look it up and see if you can find out what laws that changed, because I know in 1968 that's how it was.
I already tried to find this. It was, I think probably 6 months or maybe as much as a year ago for Hartmann Report. I wrote a whole op-ed about housing. And in fact, the thing that got me started on this was a new book that had just come out from a fellow who is looking at the U.S. housing market. And I should probably go home and look in that book. It might be in there. But I went online. I was searching for this, Joan. I just could not find. I couldn't even find a list of countries that limit home ownership. Now, maybe that's just poor research on my part. But if anybody watching knows the answer to this question, I'd love to hear it. Give us a shout.
Yeah, and it wasn't just housing. It was any type of business.
It's commercial land too. Yeah.
Yeah, every single thing that we know now are being owned by foreign countries and run by foreign countries' entities are there, and what president allowed that, and what Congress allowed this to happen to our country. Yeah. It is not an okay thing.
I'm with you. My guess is, the 1981, the election, the swearing in of Ronald Reagan on January 20th, 1981, was the beginning of the modern neoliberal era in full bloom. I mean, there was a couple of years there where Jimmy Carter was adopting some of the neoliberal policies, but mostly it was post-1981. So if there was such a law on the books and at the federal level, then it probably would have been repealed after that. If these were state laws, I don't know if they'd go up against anything federal or not, and I don't know if they are state laws, if they've all been repealed. I'm just speculating on the whole thing, Joan. I wish I knew, because housing. This is how most middle-class families basically accumulate the wealth on which they retire or that they pass along to their children. I mean, it's their house.
Absolutely.
That's their biggest asset. It's certainly my biggest asset. I think it is for most middle-class people. So, Joan, I got to run, but thank you for the call and the call to research. I've got some work to do. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Stick around. I want to get into. It's going to take an army on the Republican side. They think they can raise an army to stop us from voting. And the battle for gun control in the United States. I'll tell you about that right after this. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. The recent killing of a young black man in Michigan, Patrick Loyola, who was, the police officer was sitting on his back and put a gun right to the back of his head and shot him, is just the latest example of police killing people out of traffic stops, and predominantly black people. 28% of the people who are killed in traffic stops are black, but African Americans are only 13% of our population. Police in the United States have killed nearly 600 people during traffic stops since 2017. Mapping Police Violence is the nonprofit that's been doing the work on this. About 10% just this year, about 10% of the 1,100 people killed by police this year have been killed at traffic stops. Dante Wright, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, we know their names and we know their stories, but we're not doing enough to get this under control. Other countries tend not to have this problem. We need to do something now. There's a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, Why America Must Prepare for a Decades-Long War Over Gun Control. And what got me started thinking on this was I was reading a piece by a Republican consultant, one of these guys who consults with, a Democratic consultant, consults with Democratic campaigns. And he was saying that people like me and elected officials, people like Congressman Pocan, should not be using the phrase gun control because that just triggers the people on the right. We should instead be talking about gun safety because everybody loves safety. Control, that's not such a happy word. I call BS. We absolutely need to control guns. There are two products that are sold in America today that, when used as directed, cause death: cigarettes and guns. And we need to control them both. Now, products have what you can call a life cycle that goes through a series of stages and sometimes quite predictably, particularly controversial or even deadly products like tobacco and guns. And we saw this with tobacco. Back in 1964, the U.S. Surgeon General came out and said tobacco is killing, 500,000 Americans a year. Actually, I think the number that they were looking at back then was a couple 100,000. But it was enough to get some action going. So what happened? The tobacco industry fought back. They started a movement they called the Tea Party. That was who started the first Tea Party, was the tobacco industry. And, no more government regulations. But within a couple of decades, you had restaurants going smoke-free. You had airlines going smoke-free. You had federal laws requiring airlines to be smoke-free. That was in 2000. I think it was 1997 was when Delta, the last airline to allow smoking, banned all smoking on national and international flights. So we fought this battle. We fought it in the newspapers. We fought it in the workplace. We fought it everywhere, and ultimately sort of won. Got the tobacco industry to stop marketing to children. I mean, but there were hundreds of small battles along the way. And what I want to tell you is this is how it's going to be with gun control. It's not going to happen overnight. There's nothing that's going to happen this year in Congress, even if we, reinstated the assault weapons ban, or even if we, did, comprehensive background checks and did away with the gun control loophole. There's nothing that's going to stop these mass shootings. Not over the short term. It's going to take some time. And we have to be prepared for a long war because the NRA is. Harlan Carter, when he staged that coup in 1977 with the NRA, he knew what he was fighting for. Harlan Carter, he was the Wayne LaPierre of the 70s. When he was 17 years old, he murdered a 15-year-old, or killed. He was convicted of murder, and then he was acquitted later because they said the jury instructions were wrong. But he shot and killed a 15-year-old Hispanic boy that he thought had, with no evidence, had stolen a car. Turned out the kid hadn't, but he shot him anyway. Gut shot him with a shotgun. This was the guy who took over the NRA. He loved guns, and he sure knew what they could do in the hands of a pissed-off white boy. And that's where the NRA is at now. So get ready. This is not a battle we are going to fight and win in a year or a month. This is going to take a decade. But nonetheless, we have to engage in this. Lives are at stake. We'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And up next, audio tapes show the Republicans' plan to suppress the Democratic vote. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break and pick up your calls. And a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right to carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castille's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest, but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, "backed them," the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, "regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation." When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, "important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing." This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. "Where's the NRA?" asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. "Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too?" David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, 2 shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan presidency, one of our 2 senators from Oregon here, Mark Hatfield, wrote an op-ed for the Oregon Territory newspaper about the new right, about this whole movement that had seized the Republican Party. And in it, he called them out for escalating nuclear arms, for opposing the Equal Rights Amendment, for opposing abortion, for supporting school prayer, and for their argument that if you weren't on their side, you were not patriotic. He also goes into a long rant about how they're exploiting religion for political purposes, and he thinks it's damaging Christianity as well as America. And then finally, he says, finally, persistent threats of racism lie directly below the surface of new right ideology. And then he goes into this whole rant about that. It's really extraordinary how, what Reagan was doing is coming back into vogue. I got a whole video about the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Wanted to share this. Hang on just a second here. I wanted to share this amazing story with you from Politico. Some great reporting by Heidi Przybyla. Video recordings of Republican Party operatives meeting with grassroots activists, she writes over at Politico, to target and potentially overturn votes in Democratic precincts. The Republican Party has figured out, and by the way, this is not something that they just figured out, but they've got a new twist on it. They figured out that, number one, you can intimidate voters at the site of voting. And number two, and that's the part that's been around forever. This goes back to the 1960s, when a big lawyer by the name of, by big, I mean physically big, he was like over 6 foot tall, and by the name of William Rehnquist in Phoenix, Arizona, would go out to Native American, to polling places near Native American communities or Hispanic communities, and would loudly challenge the right of people to vote to the point that people would just like run away. He would just, he was so threatening. And this is what made William Rehnquist's chops in the GOP in the 60s, first in Arizona, then nationally, and probably one of the reasons why he was made Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, as I recall, by Ronald Reagan. I could be wrong on that, but around that time. So, that's kind of an old thing. But the new twist on it is bringing an app to this, and Heidi Przybyla lays this all out over Politico, bringing this app in that allows the people who are being recruited by and trained by the Republican Party to challenge Democratic voters. The ground zero for this, in fact, the base, the piece that is covered probably 90% of Heidi's article here in Politico is Wayne County, Michigan. That's Detroit. And Detroit is a largely black city. And therefore, arguably therefore, largely votes Democratic. And so, therefore, the Republicans are saying, okay, here's our training ground. Here's our testing ground. We will try this out. We're going to send a whole bunch of white election workers who have an app that gives them instant, real-time chat communication with lawyers and with district attorneys. So they will go into the polling place and they'll say to somebody, you don't look like you live here. Prove to me that you live here. Well, here's my driver's license. I'm not sure that's not phony. I'm going to call the district attorney right now, or I'm going to call a lawyer. So they call them. The lawyer says, okay, well, if you have any doubts, then, we're going to let me talk to the poll people, and we're going to prevent this person from voting, or we're going to flag their vote for special inspection. And if they can get enough of these, they might be able to get a local prosecutor or a local judge to say, we're just going to take all the votes from that particular precinct because it seems like there's so many dicey votes here. We're going to put all those off to the side for the moment until we can figure this out. And in the meantime, the election goes on, right? This is amazing. She talks about how the Republican Party's election integrity director in Michigan is, quote, installing party-trained volunteers prepared to challenge voters at Democratic majority polling places, has developed a website to connect those workers to local lawyers, and established a network of Republican Party-friendly district attorneys who could intervene to block vote counts at certain precincts. The Republican, when they had one of these workshops, and one of these guys said, you know, we're building an army. We're going to be doing this. Separately, she notes, Politico obtained Zoom tapings of Tim Griffin, a legal counsel to the Amistad Project, meeting with activists from multiple states and discussing plans for identifying friendly district attorneys who could stage real-time interventions, stopping the vote as it happens, essentially. She writes, Griffin speaks of building a nationwide network of district attorney allies and how to create a legal trap. Nick Penniman, Heidi Presbilla writes, founder and CEO of Issue One, an election watchdog group, says, quote, it looks like now the Trump forces are going directly after the legal system itself, and that should concern everyone. The theory is that they can, and, quote, initiate a legal conflict at the polling place that disrupts voting and then use that voting disruption as a vehicle for rejecting the vote counts from that precinct. She also notes that neither the DNC nor the Michigan State Democratic Party train poll workers. This has always been something that, you know, the political parties said we should leave this to the election officials. But now the Republican Party is basically teaching poll workers how to scam the system. Presbilla writes over at Politico, installing party loyalists on the board of canvassers, which is responsible for certifying the election, also appears to be part of the Republican strategy. In Wayne County, which includes Detroit, Republicans nominated to their board a man who said he would not have certified the 2020 election. Brilliant, right? She notes, a politically motivated poll worker connected with a zealous local lawyer to disrupt voting, followed by a challenge to the board of canvassers that may even have nothing to do with the underlying dispute, but merely the level of disruption at the polling place. She says that these recordings that they've got over at Politico.com, she said these are among the first windows into what former Trump strategist Steve Bannon calls the precinct strategy. It's designed to create enough disputes to justify intervention by Republican-controlled state legislatures who declined to take such steps in 2020. This is not for this election. I mean, they're going to do a dry run this election, get everybody in place, learn how everything works. But you're not going to see these big challenges, frankly, in my opinion, in this election. This is all preparing for 2024. Because what they want to do is create enough chaos that the election gets thrown to the state legislatures. The state legislatures, keep in mind, the governor doesn't even have a say in the Electoral College. Under the Electoral Count Act of 1886, I think it is, and the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, what happens is if the electoral vote in a state, this is the vote for president, if the electoral vote is in dispute, the state legislature decides what that electoral vote should be. And then the delegation, the state delegation, the House of Representatives votes that. You know, puts that forward as the electors for the states. This is what Donald Trump tried to do. This was the John Eastman strategy for 2020. But no state would go along with it. Now they're preparing for it. They're actively preparing to steal the 2024 election at the Electoral College for the White House. One of these election integrity people says, come election day, you create massive failure of certification. The real hope is that you can throw the choosing of electors into the state legislatures. The effort has been underway for months, and Republican officials are planning to use the August 2nd primary elections in Detroit as their dry run. This should freak out everybody. All righty. Picking up your phone calls here, Mark in Portland. Hey, Mark, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. So I have an idea that would help possibly move some minds in the Midwest and the South, some of the red states. My idea is that some liberal progressive billionaires like Tom Steyer or Mark Cuban or whoever buy or rent out billboards along busy, interstate passes that basically have messages about, such as like very short, concise memes, and one would be like the NRA's bottom line is 6 feet deep, and then have a visual of a grave with a casket going down.
Yeah.
And the other one would be that Republicans' idea of quote unquote common ground is a cemetery.
Wow.
And just have flowers and graves, and passive memes like that on people waiting in traffic, seeing these billboards, that might ultimately influence people in the elections. I mean, it's worth a shot. And I think if you've got $1 billion and you're really about wanting a democratic society that works for and for the people,
I'm with you.
That would be.
And billboards are inexpensive, compared to most other forms of advertising, and they can be very, very effective. I think that's a great idea, Mark. I'm totally with you. I don't know what Mark Cuban or Tom Steyer have to say about it. The last time I tried to lobby Tom Steyer on this, it didn't go anywhere. But I get what you're saying. And in fact, that might even be the kind of thing that local communities, local Democratic parties could invest in, because again, the cost for billboards is relatively low. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we are still here. Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Marty in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Marty, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
About the land ownership.
Mm-hmm.
That was changed in Reagan's administration.
Now, Sean found that. She was poking around, but what she found was a change in tax law, not the ability of foreigners to own land, but apparently there was some kind of tax on it. Do you know the details of this, Marty?
I'm not sure, but I remember that, the Japanese bought up all of Hawaii, and a lot of the Saudis bought all the ranch and farmland in the U.S.
Starting in the 80s because of the changes? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you can find a specific reference and tweet it at me, I'd really appreciate it. It is.
All right. One more thing is
go for it.
Florida here has the election police, so I think the state is already flipped.
Yeah, but DeSantis there was a piece yesterday that DeSantis was starting to fill the ranks of his new private police force. Is that happening down there?
Possibly, yeah. I believe so. I don't know.
Yeah, that's amazing stuff. It's amazing stuff. Marty, thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it. Mike in Sterling, Virginia. Is that how you say it?
Sterling, sterling silver.
Yeah, okay, got it. What's up?
Out where Trump goes to golf. I'll make it brief. The message gets lost when we talk about guns, but for generations, kids have been exposed to guns and other forms of murder and mayhem on TV, movies. I'm outraged that on the days of some of the mass shootings of school kids, the networks broadcasts NCIS and similar programs about
cop shows.
Murder. Pardon?
The cop shows and things. But here's the thing, Mike. Those shows are playing in Canada. Those shows are playing all over Europe. Those shows are playing, in countries all over the world with as much, enthusiasm and vigor and as many viewers as here in the United States, proportionate to the population. And yet those countries don't have mass shootings. What's the difference?
Can I add a little sidelight?
Sure.
Going back to NAFTA, Bill Clinton pushed it for beneficial purposes, but as soon as it was installed on our wishes in Canada, certain areas had virtually no crime, and the influence of the cable programming involving crime was so great it became a significant factor throughout the northwest part of Canada, at least. The other thing was,
I'm skeptical of that, Mike. You'd have to prove to me that media is driving. I get it that media can make crime more acceptable. I think that I think it does it around the edges. For example, the cop shows started showing cops with SWAT teams and doing no-knock raids and things like that before most police departments started doing that. And cops learn from cop shows how to be cops. And everybody wants to be, the kind of cop that is the badass that's on TV. And so I think a lot of bad behavior on the part of police has been driven by these shows.
One more thing about the exposure to kids. You still there, Tom?
Yeah.
I believe it was an 11-year-old kid about 40 years ago was asked why he tied up a playmate to a tree and shot him. And he wanted to know what it felt like to kill people.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't think, well, I can't say. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Back in 2018, Pastor Dave Barnhart of the St. Juania United Methodist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, delivered a sermon that is worth revisiting. He said, "The unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They are morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or the chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you're not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they're born, you can forget about them because they cease to be unborn. It's almost as if, by being born, they have died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth or power." The whole clip is over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour. Chris in Woodbridge, Virginia. Hey, Chris, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good question here. It's very easy and deservedly so to blame the right and the gun lobby and how beholden they are. But how frustrating it is to me, and this is going back from the abortion issue with the leaked draft to Buffalo to this, to where our elected representatives are screaming from the rooftops now, right? They're on the east front of the Capitol with these moving speeches that move nothing, right? That months from now, they're appropriate, but they will do nothing.
Those moving speeches have passed a lot of really good legislation through the House of Representatives. That's where they've been. And they've tried to get it through the Senate. The problem is that you've got two Democratic senators who are blocking progress in the United States Senate, and you've got 50 Republican senators and, half the U.S. House who are committed to doing absolutely nothing, Chris. This problem is not a problem of Democrats. This problem is a problem with Republicans. We've got to stop saying, there's a problem with Congress. We've got a problem with Republicans.
To your point, right? If this does not motivate at the midterms that we can clean house here, I don't know what will. If we get wiped out after, Roe, after Buffalo, after Vivaldi, what do we need to do? If that happened, is
I'm
my
with
fear.
you. That's why I think that we are looking at the possibility of some major victories this fall. I think the Republicans are shooting themselves in the foot.
I guess I agree with everything you said, but my issue is they should be screaming from the rooftops. I'm talking about these press conferences they're having now. They should be having these like it's an imminent threat every single day. They should have tried to put people on record and codify Roe years ago, just to do, when they had an opportunity. feel like they do it now, and it's nauseating me. I think we need more progressive voices. People that are not scared or concerned about, their special
I
interests.
think they are, Chris, and yes, I get your point, and yes, we need more progressives. I'm with you on that. Chris, thank you very much for the call. From Chris to Chris. Chris in Long Island, New York. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, Tom, good afternoon. So listen, in all of the talk about, gun control, gun safety, whatever, I do think that we can't allow the right and the Republicans to hide behind the Second Amendment, because we all know that that's just a crock, because what it's all about, as you know, is the money. So in every one of these discussions, I wish that they would always lead off by saying, and this person is taking this many hundreds of thousands of dollars from the NRA and from the gun manufacturers, and to call them out on it. And I realize it happens, but I think it should happen like in almost every breath.
Yeah.
Because they do hide behind the Second Amendment. They want to make it seem as though they really give a rat's about that, when all they care about is filling their pockets, and they're doing that at the expense of now.
Yeah, Mitt Romney took $13 million from the NRA. Richard Burr of North Carolina took $6 million from the NRA. I mean, they're continuing, and that doesn't count the money that the NRA pours into campaigns and into issue ads that don't specifically mention a candidate, so they don't, get counted toward that person. But everybody understands that, we're pushing this particular person. I'm with you, Chris, and we've got to take this on. Thank you so much for the call. Patsy in Arroyo Grande, California. Hey, Patsy, what's up?
Well, hi. I live in an area that's a combination of tourism for beaches and vineyards and ranches and strawberry fields and the whole bit. And we just have always had a real problem with housing here, because there's so many, so much beach, front housing and, like vacation homes and the whole thing. But it's really gotten very bad now. And the cheapest rental you can get is like a room for $900. So the people who live here are increasingly becoming homeless. And these are like working people. I mean, I have a friend who is a retired school teacher who's practically living in her car now and has half her stuff in my house, because she just, she's just like in between, couch surfing is what's happening to her. So, but the thing is, what we started doing was we found out our vote really isn't counting that much, although we vote. So we started going to city council meetings and boards of supervisor meetings, and they give you 2 or 3 minutes to talk. And the problem is, like I'm sure in most areas like mine, which are not big city areas, you have a bunch of potted plant, politicians and bureaucrats running things, and when things go bad, they don't know what to do about it. So we've been going there and just basically getting up there and doing our 2 or 3 minutes, saying, do something. And they visibly squirm. And, it's really kind of a last resort, but it's kind of fun watching these people squirm. So I'm suggesting everybody just get out there, get to your city council meeting, your board of supervisor meeting, if you can go to the Capitol, the assembly meeting, and just start speaking up.
And your school board meeting.
Yes, school board. Oh, we had a big problem with that, too. Where they were harassing the school boarders. But yes, these were outside people coming in doing this.
Yep.
Yes.
Local political action is absolutely where it's at, Patsy, and you are speaking absolute truth here.
Okay, anyway, that's what I wanted to say is people just get out there. I mean, there's all kinds of activism, and this is kind of, since I'm a retiree, and this is something retirees can do, that we can do.
Yep, show up. Amen. Patsy, thank you. Thanks for the call. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be back. We're hitting the top of the hour here. What has hurt more people, white guilt or white conservative racism? Tucker Carlson is weighing in. And why are Republicans so in love with hate speech? They took it to the Supreme Court. I'll tell you about that after the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scott poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap-and-trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries' PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that you all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You know, one of the things that I find most extraordinary, most fascinating, most troubling also about the conservative or right-wing messaging machine is how they take reality and twist it into something that isn't reality. They'll take a grain of truth and turn it into a massive lie. For example, in the United States, we are not a 100% white country, right? White people are a little more than half of this country. We've got, a substantial number of Hispanics and African Americans in the country. Asians, Native Americans make up roughly the other half, a little less than the other half. And so attempts to recognize that and create opportunities for everyone to participate, to hire people who aren't just white people, are like a good thing. This strengthens us. Diversity is strength. This is a premise that you see, you learn it in biology, for example. Diverse ecosystems are less likely to crash. Diverse, I could give you other examples, but so here's the simple reality that a lot of white people who have held power in this country for 400 years, or on this continent, are starting to say, there's never going to be a shortage of white power in this country, and it's time to make sure that people who are not white are invited into the party. This has nothing to do with guilt. This has to do with understanding the simple reality that there's obviously a fairness issue here, but even more importantly, that we are, by excluding people of color, weakening ourselves. Heather McGhee wrote a great book called The Sum of Us that I read a few months ago. And, the basic premise of the book was that by excluding people of color from the dialogue, the discourse, the activity, the economic activity, the management, the running of our, basically everything, from business to government to social. By excluding people of color, we are excluding and thus losing potential genius, potential inventors, potential people who could transform the world. I mean, if Hitler had had his way, Einstein would have been killed. Right? There is, because Einstein was part of a minority group in Germany, the Jews. So the reason why, for example, the Biden White House went out of their way to be sure to hire people of color as well as white men was because, hey, there's incredible talent in this pool as well. And by diversifying our staff, we're making the White House look more like America. This has nothing to do with any, white people sitting around anguished about, oh my God, my ancestors, no. But to get back to the point that I started out with, how amazing it is how right-wingers take a kernel of truth and turn it into a massive lie. Over on Fox News, I believe this was yesterday, it might have been the day before, a piece by Michael Luciano over at Mediaite.com. There was a story in Politico about some black staffers who are leaving the White House. Well, we're 2 years into an administration, and there's an election coming, and there's, big changes coming down the road. This is typically the time that people with political appointments who wanted to get a year or so in working for a member of the House or the Senate or working in the White House, in order to get that on their resume, this is about the time that they start leaving those jobs and looking for jobs in the private sector, being able to say, yeah, I worked in the White House Office of Cybersecurity, and so now, you should hire me to oversee security in your company. That kind of thing. It's just normal. And some of those people who are leaving in the White House right now are black people. And Politico did an article that kind of featured that. Look at these black people who are leaving the White House. Well, there's white people leaving too. It's a non-event. But Tucker Carlson decided, hey, let's do something with this one. So he brings Candace Owens on his show and says, Candace, are you surprised at the racism, the white supremacy at the White House, that it's so intense that black staffers are fleeing for their lives? Now, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has run out of the White House saying, he's coming after me with a gun or a knife. I mean, this is not just an exaggeration. It's a vile exaggeration. But Candace Owens replies, they never wanted them to actually do anything. They probably were underqualified for the positions that they even had. The old trope that black people, and this is particularly rich coming from Candace Owens, but, the old trope that black people are basically inferior to white people. This is white supremacy. And yes, there are black people who are white supremacists also, who believe that white people are superior to black people. It's sad, it's a tragedy, but it's a predictable consequence of a white supremacist culture and society that has taught everybody, including black children, for years and years and years, that white people are not only in charge, but they deserve to be because of their inherent genetic superiority. It's BS, but, it's out there. So then Candace Owens, after she lays out the, the white supremacy riff, Tucker Carlson says, is there anything more destructive than white liberal guilt? It feels like it's hurt more people than nuclear weapons. And Candace Owens says, it really has. It's not guilt. It's wanting to run a White House in a way that every organization in America should be run, where people are hired based on their qualifications and not excluded because they happen not to be white. Well, I guess I'll just leave it at that. I find this kind of riff, this story, this white supremacist story, which perfectly integrates with the white replacement theory story that Tucker Carlson also sells on Fox News. I find it to be just so incredibly cynical and destructive. And, they're programming their viewers in ways that certainly could not be called productive, useful for this country. It's unfortunate. Meanwhile, Texas and Florida have passed laws saying that basically, how dare you, Facebook, stop Nazis from posting things? We want more white supremacy on Facebook and Twitter. Seriously. They didn't, quite say it like that. They said it in code, but they passed laws saying that Facebook and Twitter and other social media accounts, other social media companies that have more than 50 million users or members cannot censor based on content. Now, you and I know if this is coming out of Texas and Florida, the content that they're talking about is white supremacy, racism, hate, Nazism. I mean, these are the values that you see reflected in people like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton, unambiguously, generally speaking. So yesterday, the Supreme Court said they didn't overturn the law. This is the Texas law specifically. They didn't overturn it, but they put it on hold until the, I believe it's the Fifth Circuit. Yeah, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals can look at it and make a determination. So for the moment, Facebook and Twitter and whatnot can continue to block hate speech coming out of Russian trolls or coming out of, Texas racists. What I find fascinating about this is that the 5 justices who said, we're going to hold off on this and we're not going to let this law go into effect, were John Roberts, the kind of so-called middle-of-the-road conservative, Stephen Breyer, a liberal, Sonia Sotomayor, a liberal, Brett Kavanaugh, beer bong Biff, and Amy Handmaid Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett. They granted the stay. Sam Alito said, no, this law should go into effect. Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, the 3 of them, they penned a dissent. Oh, yeah, they're censoring the Nazis. We can't have that in America. What's so weird about all this, and the argument that the tech companies, along with the NAACP and some of the LGBTQ groups that joined them in challenging this law before the Supreme Court. And by the way, the way that this ruling came down means that after the Fifth Circuit rules, this will almost certainly end up with the Supreme Court anyway. But basically, the logic was it's not the job of the government to be censoring anybody. It's not the job of the government. I mean, this is the First Amendment protection of free speech. Now, what that First Amendment protection of the free speech says is that government may not censor speech. Nowhere does it say Facebook may not censor speech. Facebook is a private company. I mean, it's publicly held, but it's a private company. It's not the government. The Constitution limits the powers of government and asserts rights of people within the context of limitations on those rights by government. It doesn't say that, what Texas is trying to do here, saying you are censoring free speech to Facebook, is like saying to any company in Texas, you may not fire people for calling their coworkers the N-word. Or you may not fire people for harassing customers, because that's free speech. Those people are expressing their opinions. I mean, you get how bizarre the logic is of this Texas and Florida law, how aggressively these guys want to embrace Nazism and white supremacy and make sure that this poison fills our social media spaces. It's astonishing. Anyhow, I wanted to flag that for you to let you know about it. We will continue our conversation on all of these topics right after the break. I'll pick up your phone calls. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Be right back. And welcome back. Richard in Devon, Colorado. Hey, Richard, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
I have a proposal to handle the gun problem, the gun control problem. Why don't we just tax the hell out of owning a gun and purchasing a gun?
That would be one way to do it. But then, you know, for example, the company that sold one of the guns that the shooter in Texas used last week is selling those guns on a layaway plan. So you can go in and buy a gun and, you know, no money down, which, you know, works just fine if you know that you're going to die in the mass shooting. No money down or $50 down, and you walk out of there with a $1,000 gun and a piece of paper you've signed saying that you will make an installment payment for the next 5 years. What do you do about that, Richard?
Well, you have to pay the tax when you take possession of the gun. And the thing of it is, we've done the same basic thing with cigarettes.
And alcohol.
To the point, and alcohol, to the point where it's really expensive to smoke or drink, and it's cut down on the amount of smoking.
Yeah, smoking in particular.
If there was like a $1,500 charge at the time of purchase, with the proceeds to go to gun control.
How about the proceeds going to pay for the funerals of people who are killed in mass shootings?
Well, you know, and mental programs to prevent it from happening, education programs.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason why that could not be done. And, you know, the Republicans would scream, well, you're raising taxes. But it's just, to me, it would be a way of doing this without any of the Second Amendment problems of ownership. If you want to own it...
The problem we have right now, Richard, is that for every 100 people in America, there's over 100 guns. In Yemen, which is the second most heavily gun-populated country in the world, it's for every 100 people in Yemen, there's about 50 guns. For Canada, for every 100 people in Canada, there's about 30 guns. So we have more than 3 times as many guns per person as Canada does. And that's why we have, you know, so many more killings. So putting a tax on guns going forward is going to do nothing about the 400 million plus guns in circulation in a country with only 335 million people. What do you do about that?
Okay, I have a solution for that, too. Have a government program to buy the guns back.
Yeah. And that worked well in Australia. It worked well in the United Kingdom. It worked very, very well in New Zealand. It worked well in Norway, too. All of those countries, after they had mass shootings, you know, significant, terrible mass shootings, they all put into place really significant gun control laws and gun buyback programs. And communities around America periodically run gun buyback programs, by the way. You know, towns and counties and sometimes police departments. But I think that my personal opinion is that, number one, we need to get weapons of war off the streets. And, you know, it's just crazy that that George W. Bush let the assault weapon ban expire in 2004. That was when the really high death rate mass slaughters started. Richard, thank you for the call. Keep thinking. You know, you've got a good one there, Richard. Step by step, we'll get there. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well, along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 24 minutes past the hour. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Hey, George, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing? I wanted to talk to you about gun control and give you a few examples from my collection, see what you think.
Okay.
Okay, I own a British Lee Metford Model 1895 rifle, 10-round magazine that served in the Boer War with the Royal Navy in World War I, and according to the ATF, I didn't have to go through a background check because anything made prior to 1898 is not considered a firearm. It's considered an antique.
Huh. Interesting. So
that one, you had to load each round individually. You couldn't load it with a stripper clip.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay.
And the second example, you know what a British Brown Bess musket is, right?
I don't.
Okay,
I've heard
it was
of them, but I don't know what it is.
Primary British military rifle from around 1715 through the 1830s, and the British during the Revolutionary War, that was their primary arm. But some guy got on the internet and said, it took 20 minutes to load and fire a flintlock. Well, the average redcoat could fire several rounds a minute. I'm 74, and I own a replica Brown Bess musket, and I can shoot 3 or 4 rounds on target per minute.
That's pretty impressive. I've watched enough movies where they're reloading those things. I don't see how you can do 3 or 4 of those a minute.
Oh, well, you can. Believe me, I've done it.
Okay. All right. So what's your point, George?
Yeah, I just was wondering whether you thought something like that Model 1895 should be subject to gun control.
No, I don't. I think that antiques are antiques and probably...
Exactly, right. Anything... I'm all with you with... I was in the Army and I had to qualify with an M16 and I have no desire to own one.
Yeah. Yeah, these are, what we have now are weapons of war, and you've got bullets that... the 223, I think they're called, bullets that, are...
Yeah, right. Around, yes.
There's so much more power behind them. They're traveling so rapidly that when they hit the body, they just start to tumble and they just blow giant holes in people. And why do we need weapons of war? I don't get it. I don't even think cops should be having these things. I think they should have, semi-automatic sidearms, sure, and rifles. Go ahead.
Well, I got a compliment for you if you have time.
Quickly.
Yeah, you're a liberal and I'm conservative, but you're the only liberal I talk to. You're reasonable. I love talking to you and love listening to your show.
Well, thank you, George. Nice talking with you. I appreciate the compliment. Thank you. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls on the other side of this break. It's the True People's Media, the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $137 $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, The Rise of the New Global Super-Rich and the Fall of Everyone Else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scott poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap and trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that y'all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. An amazing new report out from the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution suggesting that pollution is causing around 9 million premature deaths around the world, but 4.5 million of those are the consequence of outdoor air pollution. And the major contributor to that outdoor air pollution is cars and trucks. It turns out that cars and trucks that burn fossil fuels produce little teeny tiny particles. They're called PM 2.5 because they're smaller than 2.5 microns, essentially microscopic, that bury themselves deep inside your lungs and then migrate to the heart, the brain. They cause damage throughout the body. They can even cause lung cancer and heart disease and things. And guess what? Electric cars produce none of this. Also, when you hit the brakes on a regular car, you're burning your brake pads and throwing particles out into the air. On an electric car, you hit the brakes, you're slowing it down with the motors. There's a video about the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Canyon in Renton, Washington. Hey, Canyon, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Canyon. What's on your mind?
Okay. About the Michigan poll watchers and that experiment. I was just going to suggest to maybe your Michigan listeners in that Detroit area, why not just ignore the requests of random citizens asking for your identification? Well, why couldn't you just do that?
You could. The problem is that if they say to the poll worker, I think, or I have reason to believe that this person is fraudulent or is illegitimate, the law requires that that poll worker do something. And so, it's A, and B, they've come right out and said basically their goal is to create so much chaos that the entire precinct might be shut down, or people will be turned away, or it'll slow things down and people will give up, or that eventually that precinct might not even be counted. So, yeah, you may be able to tell, a Republican poll watcher to screw off. I don't know that that's going to be the solution to the problem, though, Canyon. This is much bigger than that. And like I said, this goes back to the 60s. Operation Eagle Eye with William Rehnquist.
It sounds like it's more racially profiling than anything.
Absolutely.
And, if people go into the polls, just ignore and make them exhaust, the poll watcher exhaust all their resources and saying, excuse me, they're only going to be able to focus on, one or two at a time, and it would more frustrate them. And
no, I get that, but if they can turn the line, if they can turn the line from a half hour to vote to 3 hours to vote simply by creating this kind of disruption, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to drop out of that line because they got to get back to work, and that's one of the things that they're planning on. But I get what you're saying, Canyon. Thanks a lot for the call. Linda in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was listening earlier, and I was thinking about we need to get out and vote. And what really annoys me is the House of Representatives and the senators. I'm older, and it used to be that was a service job. You represented, it was a service job for the country. They have no service. It's all about power. And even the senators and the House of Representative people that are not rerunning don't even have the guts to vote for things that are right, like gun control, the anti-abortion, pro-life things. I don't know where they became so, they poll everything and then they vote according to what they want anyway, even though people want gun control.
Yeah, but Linda, I would say by and large, you're talking about Republicans, not the House of Representatives and the Senate. And that's a distinction that we need to start making, because it's a distinction that is not typically made on network news or on the Sunday shows, oh, yeah, Congress is so dysfunctional. No, sorry, the House of Representatives has passed 2 really good gun control laws this year. It's just that, they're jammed up in the Senate where 100% of the Republicans are saying, no, we will not talk about this. And then, you get Joe Manchin in there, too. So it's not Democrats. But you're absolutely right, except the one qualification I would make, and I just heard you agree with me on this, is that we have a Republican problem. We don't have a Congress problem. We have a Republican problem. Linda, thank you very much. Well said. Tony in Shirley, New York. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you doing, sir?
Good. What's on your mind?
Unfortunately, I'm waiting for a phone call from my employer right now. I'm expecting to get discharged. Reason being is that I'm a salesman, and I've been a machinist for over 31 years. And I worked a lot with 4 of the biggest firearm manufacturers. You would know all of them by name if I said them, but I don't want to get anybody in any trouble or get myself in any more trouble than I'm in. But that being said, after what happened in Texas, I feel a moral culpability for assisting these manufacturers and showing them best machining practices and methodologies and manufacturing uppers and lowers and receivers. And I just can't do it any longer.
Wow.
And, I know my my company is going to be pissed because, quite frankly, they do business with this company because of the relationship that I've developed over the years with them. But after talking with even the president of I can just say the company is located in Yonkers currently, 3 of their manufacturing facilities. And the executives there told me point blank the 2 things that they look forward to is a Democratic president and one of these mass shootings, because either one, if you have a Democratic president, automatically they're going to start saying, oh, they're going to take your Second Amendment rights, gun sales go up immediately.
That's correct.
And when you see a shooting like this, automatically gun sales have already gone through the roof, and I've been getting calls. They've got 30-week lead times on 70-75 aluminum that they manufacture the upper and lowers for the AR-15s that this one company manufactures. I just can't do this no longer. I can't.
Wow. Well, Tony, I honor you.
What kills me even more is that the people that I represent that manufacture the tools for these companies, they go to these gun shows, and they show them we manufacture these specific step reamers, these specific type of end mills to manufacture these products. But if you go on their websites, you cannot find them. They don't have them listed.
Yeah.
Not one of them.
Yeah. Tony, you're going to be, I'm assuming you have a skill set that will allow you to land on your feet?
Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I wish you the very best, Tony. It's got to be tough. I mean, I remember back in the 90s, when particularly when the tobacco settlement came down, and I think it was 98, there were people who were, like receptionists at big tobacco companies who were quitting their jobs. I mean, it appears that sometimes, there are these moments in history where people of good conscience are confronted with a come to Jesus moment, and obviously you're one of them. I just want to say I have so much respect for you.
I thank you. I just wish I could have done something a lot earlier.
Yeah, I get it.
And I wish everybody else that does this would really rethink their morals if they really, really care, because, everybody's proclaiming Second Amendment, but they keep forgetting a well-regulated militia. Yeah. They keep leaving certain specific criteria out of the equation. They leave this out consistently. They never emphasize this whatsoever. And there's no reason why anybody needs a bullet that has a velocity of 3,200 feet per second, which is precisely what an AR-15 round is.
Yeah. No,
that's why children had to be identified through DNA, because when these children, as small as they are, were shot, there was not much left of them, sadly.
No, it'll blow their face right off their head, or their head right off their neck. I mean, it's incredible. Tony, thank you for the call, and I wish you well. Check in with us in a few weeks. Let us know how it's going, okay?
I will, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, what's on your mind today?
I see that these mass shootings and these shooters don't get charged with domestic terrorism when they get charged with the other crimes from their states.
We don't have
Why
good, strong laws in the United States against domestic terrorism. That's why.
Is it if as soon as they commit the act, but why don't they charge with the federal crime?
Yeah.
Why they charge with only state crimes?
It's a good topic to probably get somebody who really knows this stuff, who's a lawmaker, on, because my understanding is that we have very, very rigorous laws around terrorism. Our ability to even suspend habeas corpus and things like that around terrorism. But when you're talking domestic terrorism, when you're talking Americans who are committing terrorism, the laws go really, really soft. And they go really soft because every time we try to pass a strong domestic terrorism law, the people who are the friends of the domestic terrorists, which is mostly Republicans who are friends of Nazis and white supremacists and hateful bigot racists, start yelling and squealing and screaming, and that's what happens. But I am not an expert on our anti-terrorism laws, and we need to find one. Johan, thanks for raising a really great question. I appreciate it. We'll be back. We're coming up on 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for we the people of the United States of America, and frankly, all life on Earth. We're concerned about it all. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Speaking the truths, the gun manufacturers would really rather you didn't know. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Vincent in Prescott Valley, Arizona. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Tom. I was wondering, the tactics that are used by the Republican Party and to keep power and control all surround violence.
For example?
Jim Morrison, who had a father that was a carrier admiral or captain in the Vietnam War. Jim Morrison came out with a statement that this world is a will to power and nothing more. Are the Republicans emulating that sarcastic comment?
Was that Jim Morrison of the Doors?
Yes.
Huh. I didn't know that his dad was an aircraft carrier commander. That's fascinating. I think that you're touching something that's quite consequential and significant, Vincent, which is that the Republican Party doesn't have anything basically to offer the American people. They are the party of the rich, the party of the powerful, the party of the corporate, and the party of the white increasingly, and that's. The rich, powerful, and corporate is where they put all their legislation and probably 90% of their efforts. The supporting white supremacy and those who proclaim it is where they put 10% of their efforts, but that's enough to get them the white hate vote. And that's basically all they've got to offer. And yeah, I think I agree. I think it is all about power. Vincent, thanks.
I'm in Prescott, and I have to talk to right-wingers all the time because I'm in this part of the country. And the conversation always ends up that violence is okay.
Violence in support of a particular end or goal, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, you try and talk to them about democracy and how it was formed and all the work it took, and they say, well, we give up on it.
That's a tough
Violence
one.
Is the only way.
That's a tough one. I know there's a couple of right-wing billionaires who have come out and endorsed the libertarian position that democracy is an inferior form of governance, and really oligarchy is where we should be at, and all that sort of thing. But I've never actually had a person tell me that who was like, somebody I knew at work or at, a next door neighbor or something like that. I mean, I've never heard anybody actually say that out loud outside of, wackadoodles like Stephen Moore said it on this program.
You got to visit me, Tom. You got to come.
Got to come to Prescott, huh?
Yeah. Thank you for Richard Wolff and Senator Pocan speaking regularly. It's a blessing.
Yeah, well, thank you, Vincent. Yeah, they're a blessing to our program, too. And thank you for your kind comments. This issue of democracy is one that I don't think gets anywhere near enough attention. The idea, just the core idea of democracy. I've written a couple of books in which I've written extensively about how animals organize themselves democratically, because it guarantees the best survival outcome, the best chance of survival. And I believe that is true of society and the human species, that democracy provides our best chance of survival. And those people who are preaching against democracy are preaching against, in my opinion, the survival of not only our country, but of the human race. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. The Houston Chronicle just published a blistering editorial calling out Republican Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, saying, Texas lawmakers won't even pass universal background checks to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, even though 80% of Texans support them. They go on to say Texas had 1 million registered weapons in 2021, more than second place Florida and third place Virginia combined. The United States leads all wealthy nations with its gun murder rate. At the end of it, they say, we call on Abbott, whose campaign war chest is comfortably overflowing in his re-election bid against Democrat Beto O'Rourke, to replenish his bankrupt conscience and do something, anything, to stop the blood of children and the tears of parents. This is the entire editorial board of the Houston Chronicle calling out Greg Abbott. Got a video about the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls, Sean in British Columbia, Canada. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Just thinking about you're talking about the Republicans' attack on tech companies and how the conservative voices are so-called being oppressed. Well, when you look at the whole history of and I can think of all the decades that they've been pushing this line of, protecting corporations and corporations' free speech. It goes all the way back to, I remember in the civil rights era, watching documentaries about how the sit-ins in the cafes, libertarians and conservatives were arguing that, the store has the right to refuse service to anybody that, came
Correct.
Into their place.
And
so,
you know how LBJ got around that? It was John Kennedy initially, but Johnson carried most of it with Bobby as the AG, was saying that under the Interstate Commerce Clause in the U.S. Constitution, Congress has the right to regulate commerce between the states. And because those lunch counters in Alabama and Georgia served food, they served ketchup made by Heinz in Pennsylvania, that therefore they were engaged in interstate commerce, and therefore they could be regulated by the federal government. It was a stretch, and the conservatives were, yelling and screaming about it, but it worked.
So how about for the tech companies? Why don't we just, just say, well, we'll just nationalize them? They're just now public companies that are run by the government, and that would really, spin their heads. But yeah. I mean, that's one way. Because they're asking for it. They're asking for, some kind of, if they want everything, if they want,
There was one caveat, Sean, and this was something that was pointed out in one of the dissents, and I'm sorry, I've tossed the article now, and it would take me more time to find it than, but that was in the Texas law, and that was that it required the companies to reveal the nature of their algorithm and the systems that they use to decide what to censor and what not to censor. I don't have a problem with government requiring that of a company. In fact, I think it probably is a good idea. And I think that might be one of the reasons why some of the liberals on the court, kind of went along with this, and why Elena Kagan dissented, actually. She did not go along with this decision. So, there's another shoe to drop, is my guess. We'll see.
Well, and the other thing is, anytime they do complain about, the oppressive, rules against tech companies, we should be talking about the actual details. Like, I'm thinking of Milo Yiannopoulos, the conservative commentator, when he was, kind of hounding and harassing Leslie Jones, who's a Saturday Night Live player there. She was almost broke down on Twitter, just saying, I'm out of here. This is just, too much. I mean, it's that kind of stuff that has to be talked about, like the details about, well, why is Twitter, you're
there, Sean, you're there in British Columbia, Canada. Are your right-wingers in Canada as filled with hate and vitriol as ours are here in the United States?
Well, we were kind of living in this bit of an oasis for a long time, where it's like, well, we're not like the States, and we have our rednecks and we have hard right people, but they never really had a voice. But that all changed in the with the convoy occupation in Ottawa.
Oh, really?
Because I've been following politics forever, and I just have this sense that something happened there where it was almost like a conference of the really extremists. And then our new, the guy running for the Conservative Party now, Pierre Poilievre, he's kind of taken that message and ran with it. And now they are coalescing around that kind of leader. And that's a real first for Canada. That's caused a bit of a split in the Conservative Party, as they're having a leadership race right now, where you got Jean Charest, trying to stay somewhat moderate and traditional, and now Pierre is going, tapping into the extremist message. So it's causing a split there, and that's the first time I've ever seen that really in Canadian politics. Because, like I say, we've always had this nice, relaxed way of going,
sounds kind of like your Tea Party. We had the Tea Party. The Tea Party was this, it was funded by right-wing billionaires, but it was basically a white supremacist reaction to a black guy in the White House, the first black president. And it became not the Tea Party itself, but that movement became the foundation, in my opinion, of basically everything that followed, the whole white supremacist thing here. It seems like the convoy in Canada did the same thing for y'all.
Yeah, it's causing a crack in, our kind of peaceful kind of just, politics as usual. And I think this is the beginning of something. I don't know how far it'll go, but they've kind of tapped into that redneck anger that we got.
So your Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has introduced legislation to stop all gun sales. Do you think it's going to pass?
I think it will, because most of the response I see from people is it's all for that, right? Because we, like I say, we don't have a gun culture, so people are kind of for that stuff. But there will be a vocal.
Sean, I got to run. Thank you so much for the call and for informing me. I appreciate it. Thank you for being with us today, by the way, and we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, same bat channel, same bat time again, however you say it. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, which includes you. There's so much you can do, and this is an election year. It's so important. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.